Hey, welcome to Thinking Thursday with your host, Chris Sauls. We're on episode 6, and today we're going to talk about self leadership. Don't panic. This is not about all about self. This is about leading yourself. This is about self leadership, how you get up every day, the things that you say to yourself every day, the way that you approach your day, and basically those things that we've all been taught on the way through, I would say from a young age to an adult age, and then getting into the moment where we ourselves have to manage our day, even when we're on the job. So I'm not talking about just self leadership in the workplace, talking about self leadership, what you're doing to lead yourself each and every day. All right, again, welcome to Thinking Thursday with your host, Chris Sauls. We are talking self leadership and we're really getting down to the brass tacks of what is it every day? What does it mean each and every day to get up, have a schedule or a routine or an agenda, and what do you do with it? Are you planning it out? Are you taking the time each day to be intentional about what you do with your time? Because time is a non renewable resource, folks. You don't get it back. Once you've spent it, there is no way to get it back. I find myself oftentimes thinking that how many times in my career, and I'm thinking about on the job, have I spent time troubleshooting something in a technology space, working on something where I didn't follow my own rule or my own guidance based on experience, which comes down to if you've spent 30 minutes troubleshooting something and you haven't asked anyone any questions, in your team, in a group, you need to pause. You need to think about that. If you're in a critical environment, you probably should have already sent out a call if you have service and support with a vendor. That call, that email, that system, that ticket should have already been created. Now, how many times have I done that in my career? I don't know, but I do know this. I had to learn that rule, I had to teach that rule, and I had to learn not to break that rule. Those are the things when we're talking about self leadership, self management. How do you manage it? And that's in the workplace. If I jump back to every day when I get up, and I'm gonna give a little bit about my agenda, right? Because I can talk about my experience. I can talk about my experience with teams. I can talk about what I've experienced in a career field, in the technology career field across 5 different verticals, and what that looks like and how that feels and how it's much different depending on which vertical you're in and what you're actually working on. Make a small adjustment here, guys. I love adjusting things for this podcast. You have no idea. By the way, for those of you, if this is the first time you've ever watched it, the first time you've ever listened to me, I don't know if I've announced this, but I talk to think. So I go on a journey in these things when it gets to a particular topic like self-leadership. It's basically the conversation of discovery and looking back over a career of 3 decades, thinking about why do I coach now, why coaching's important, why when I found a coach and a mentor, it was so important to listen, learn, and be coachable. All of those things come to me, and I think about self leadership from those lessons being probably one of the most critical. And I can go back to, I'll go back really far in my history. In the 4th grade, I found my brother's trumpet. My brother's 12 years older than and I am. I'm adopted. He had a trumpet that he had left in a closet. And I picked it up, and there was a manual, and there was all how to learn how to play the trumpet. And I sat down and I followed the instructions. I got to a point, though, where there was something I couldn't do and I couldn't quite figure it out. So I went and asked him a few questions. I asked a few questions. He gave me some guidance. I went back and I was able to learn the basics of the trumpet before we had band in 5th grade. Now, that's a young age, but that's just talking about, I don't know if that's really self leadership, but it was a moment where I had to get some help. And even at that age, I needed assistance in learning and to move forward, right? So that was a bit of mentoring or coaching that, learning early on to be coachable. The other thing is sometimes you can't do it on your own. You need help. You need someone to come alongside you that will maybe inspire you, encourage you, and drive you forward. Back to self leadership and really getting into it. When I was in the military, in the United States Army, 1990 to 1997, there was a definite program for getting promoted. There was a definite route that you had to take to get promoted. And I think about that in corporate America or in our medium and large businesses, and really maybe even in some of the small businesses. How do we progress forward and what actually gets us there? And this is where self-leadership really plays a role in those spaces. Is when I was in the military, the self-leadership was you needed to take courses. You needed to have either correspondence courses or you needed to enroll in whatever educational platform that they may have had, but depending on the base and the station that you were at. Today, that's much different, right? I was born in the 90s, the 1900. I was born in 1900s, in the 1900s, in the 70s, not in the 90s. But thinking about how things changed in the 90s, when the information age or technology started to really be prevalent in pretty much any place that you were at. I remember being in Fayetteville, North Carolina at that point and getting my first computer in 1994, which probably sounds a little later for some, but for others, 1994, having a computer in a home, that was a new and novel thing. I mean, they were selling them at Sears of all places. And thinking about that, that just changes how how technology and things have happened. But self leadership, again, I told you, I ideate, I think about through these things, I kind of work my way through these topics. So what led me in the military was I needed to do these specific things to get specific setups or points, as they looked at it, in a point system, to be prepared to go in front of a board where then I would go through the board, and if I passed the board, then I would be up for promotion. I would go from, say, being an E4, which at that time a specialist, to being an E4 P, which was a promotable specialist, to be on the list to be promoted to sergeant. That was a career path, right? They had a very distinct way that we do that. And I had to be self led to go do all those courses prior to that. I also had to be self led. Now, I had mentors and coaches along the way to help me to learn what I needed for the board and those types of items. Now we get into corporate America and we think about climbing that ladder. And we hear it all the time like, I climbed the wrong ladder against the wrong wall because I was really leading myself in a direction that wasn't where I wanted to go. And what I would call that is unintentional growth. Because unfortunately, for everybody out there, you are going to grow either intentionally or unintentionally. Now, I've got lessons of the unintentional out the wazoo. I think we all have unintentional learnings that we've picked up from a friend, a mentor, a coach, observation. I talk about this often. From 2004 to 2008, I had a leadership position during that period. I failed miserably along the way. While I still held the position, I had some very, very, what I would say, tough experiences in that. And then on top of that, I'm not sure that I was being mentored or coached in a way that I would want anyone to be mentored or coached along the way in that particular period of time. And that's not picking on the folks that were there. It's just that their styles and their leadership, while it was good maybe for their environment where they had been, it needed to evolve. And I needed to evolve as a leader. So I think about that quite often, is that we have to, in this self leadership piece, is being self aware, right? So key point there is self awareness. This is where assessments come to play. I talk about this quite often. DISC assessments, Myers Briggs. Uh, let's see. There's the six working genius assessment. If you're in a team, things that you like to see there. It's a very good assessment, by the way. Um, you got Enneagram. There's multitudes of them out there, and there's multitudes ways to get there. And I'm a behavioral analysis consultant, and I do teach DISC. That is the assessment that I use. But let's get into the self awareness part of that. If you are trying to learn about yourself and understand where you're at, you really need to get a real handle on how you operate, what your defaults are, what your mask is, how do you react under pressure, and then you not only have to be self aware, but you have to self manage that. You got to get into that moment where I'm not going to allow my emotions to override. I dealt with a big problem with that for years because I grew up in a particular way, in a particular fashion that I would say I had a fantastic childhood. I had all kinds of things that went right, all kinds of things that went wrong. But what I will say is my childhood in general was, fantastic. But there were some things that I was taught along the way about leaders or about people that were in charge that affected me much longer than I had expected. And they were things that I had to unlearn. And unlearning, one of the most crucial factors in self leadership is unlearning your bad habits or unlearning some of that unintentional learning that you've had and reprogramming that. The things that you say to yourself each and every day, I know I've said this. I don't do it now, but I have done it in the past. Man, that was so dumb. Why am I so dumb about that particular thing? And, why did I do that stupid thing? I have said those things to myself. Those are not positive ways to talk to yourself. You get that into your subconscious, it's going to make it really difficult to make progress. The longest conversation you have with anyone or anything each and every day is going to be your subconscious, what you're saying to yourself, how you're talking to yourself. Are you building yourself up? And I don't mean false sense of security or anything like that. I mean like truly talking to yourself the way you would talk to another human being. Would you say that to someone else? And if you would, does that mean that maybe you're predispositioned to that because you were taught that? And should you say that to someone else? We know we see it every day now. We see it all the time. We're in the information age. You got social media. You got every channel out there. You see people saying things that they've been taught, and they're just repeating it. Think about it. If it's not helping someone else and it's not moving the conversation forward, do you really need to get into that? Okay, really the self leadership piece, because I want to wrap this up. You guys may see in these podcasts, I'm trying to keep them in a specific format for everyone, few minutes in on every topic. But as you start to look at these and you start to listen to self leadership or start digging into the self leadership conversation, there are places within teams where self leadership can be detrimental. If you have a team that's highly operational and there are a lot of tasks, so like a task queue, and this is for my technology folks. If you've got a task queue out there and it's something that, it's got to be on a cycle, then you do need someone to manage it, make sure that it's divvied up and make sure it's handed out and it is a little bit more mechanical. That is because there's an expectation that that list or that queue will get done. If you get too far into the self leadership, which is really good for creativity and development and things like that, if you get too far into that, people will lean away from getting the meat of those tasks done. You will find things that happen where people will just be picking off the things that they can knock out in a few minutes and keeping the list smaller, but your bigger issues may be building up in the background. Do not want that if you've got a queue. Those of you that do customer support, customer service type items, those that are technology, tier three, tier two, tier three type workers, you don't want to be in that situation. You don't want your queue building up like that. So you have to be careful with that self leadership, like driving it too far at that point. Definitely have experienced that myself and gone through where trying to teach it and trying to instill it within a team, maybe leaning too heavily on that and then having to back up and kind of readjust it. But again, you just got to find that fine tune it in. So I'm going to wrap this up with a couple of points here. Self leadership, it is a key element to how successful you will be each day. It's intentional. You need to have what your agenda is every day laid out, where you want to be. Yeah, you want some wiggle room in there. Don't be too rigid about it, but make sure that you have an agenda for yourself. You guys have a wonderful week. This was Thinking Thursday with your host, Chris Sauls, Self Leadership. important things.